important issues of peace and sustainability across Africa and all over the world. Today we have the honor and pleasure of having Achim Alan de Merlo, and I will try and also say a little bit about him and the topic for today. I want, first of all, to welcome you all to this Global Peace Forum. And I would like, of course, also to ask you to please mute your microphones unless you're speaking to us. So as usual, we have about 1 hour of presentation, and then we have questions and comments for discussion. And for the first time today, we are starting with the impulses and orientations of peace studies. And these are some brief ideas, just an idea actually, from the book Peace Studies in a Globalized World by Liu Cheng and Egon Spiegel. And it's about the UN decade, 2001 to 2010, on the culture of peace and non-violence for the children of the world. And I think I'm just one slide ahead. So at the beginning of the new millennium, the United Nations started a decade with the president setting the culture of peace.
The hearing is not clear very well. Can you make it to be more enlarged than this?
Okay, I'll just go through, read it quickly, and then we'll just continue with the presentation for today. Sorry about
that. No problem. All right.
Yeah.
No
Thank
problem.
you. Okay, that's all right. So the decade lasted from 2001 to 2010. Following on from this, the task is to continue and make deeper the progress achieved during these years, especially by developing peace studies, peace science in the form of peace research, peace education, and peace activism. This involves motivating and initiating non-governmental peace movements, pressuring governments to support peace activities and to act in accordance with the principles of peace building. To do this, we need to offer peace studies and study peace in all the complexity of a discipline linked with many other academic disciplines. And now I would like to say a few words about our speaker for today. He's also a familiar face here because he has also participated in our webinars, and is joining us from Tokyo, Japan. Just one moment, I'm trying to open just the title for today is The Long Pedigree of United Nations Development System Reforms, Continuity and Change. And I think this is a very important topic. We should all be excited about it because we all are connected in one way or the other. We are affected by whatever is decided and operationalized over there. I'll stop sharing this one so that I can share now the new one on Alan de Merlo. Thank you for your patience. I hope this is the right one.
Yes.
Yes. So please, Achim, you are welcome to give us a presentation. You can say a few words about yourself because I've made this introduction very brief and because there were a few things I wanted to sort out before. But thank you very much. And thank you everybody for your patience and for joining Global Peace. You're welcome, please, Achim.
Okay. Thank you, George. Thank you very much for the floor and for having organized this venue tonight, this talk actually. Personally, I'm sending my best regards to everyone online from Tokyo. Here is about 10:30, so it's already night. But for you also, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. I'm currently here in Tokyo as a researcher and teacher at university. And in this occasion, I would like to thank the Institute of International Relations of Sophia University, which is hosting me already from 2 years by now. And also the Graduate Institute in Geneva, where actually most of the studies, my PhD has been done. And also this presentation tonight is thanks to Professor Browne, which was my professor at the time in Geneva about development and UN development. So most of the information you see is also based on his courses in Geneva. And having said that, I would like to start with this first anecdote, which is the next slide, please, George. Actually, in your case, it's just the next page because it's a PDF, actually, what you got.
Oh, I just went very fast, sorry.
Just one, yeah. It's an anecdote which I would like to share with everyone after this. Yeah, perfect. Now, in 2000, it was about a few years ago, before coming to Japan to finish my PhD, I attended the birthday of Kofi Annan in Geneva at the Graduate Institute. It was actually was his last birthday. As you know, he passed away a few months after April. And in that case, in that occasion, the former Secretary General had revealed an anecdote, which I put here, because it summarized a bit my presentation tonight, and also the article, I mean the chapter actually that I proposed to the network, to you, George, and your committee for eventual publication. So this anecdote was revealed by Kofi Annan himself in the meeting in the Graduate Institute at the time when the BBC was taking an interview at the same time. So basically, it highlights how difficult it is to reform the United Nations because of many reasons that I would like to present you tonight. Now, this presentation is based on a chapter, on our article or paper, you can call it. I will highlight in this presentation mostly the Jackson report you will see later, because it is still relevant in my consideration, but also there is some difference because this presentation will also look more at the current challenges and actually also explain a bit to the public some structures within the United Nations, a bit more explanation, basic explanation how the UN works. I didn't say that in my presentation, but I've been spending many years at the UN, not at the moment now here in Tokyo, but also as a peacekeeper in Africa, in Ivory Coast, and in Central Asia. So and in Latin America. Some of these considerations here are my own talked, and I speak, of course, in my personal capacity, not connected with the organization, even if the slide might look a bit official UN, is just in my personal capacity and also on the basis of my personal experience about this issue of United Nations Development System reform. So this is the in an introductory slide about how usually, people think that UN is one single entity in New York with a General Assembly. But frankly speaking, we should remember how the UN is structured, basically since the origins, 1945, Washington Treaty, and so on. Still today, the member states are relevant in every decision that the UN is taking. So it's not really a government where actually the UN Secretary General decides with me in the meetings or in the General Assembly, everything, but still, I will say, and you can see on the basis of the number of X, which are in this slide, is still a member state organization, still or ever been. This is open to discussion. Then we have, of course, the Secretariat, which is working to implement all these policy decisions. And lastly, I will say the third UN, which is the one of the people, right? And probably the more important one, but in this structure, you can see the three pillars and how actually these three pillars, later we will see how these three pillars work together. Now, very superficially, I will say the next slide is explaining also from this structure, how the structure is then divided in the main activities that the UN is carrying on. Has been, of course, developed. This is more a current situation. It was not always like this in the past, in the 60s, in the 50s, when the UN started is enlarging its scope, and also the number of agencies has increasingly developed over the years. So summarizing this, you can see the four pillars in which the UN is working. Most relevant for my experience and also for Africa, indeed, is also the issues of UN peacekeeping. But this is a pillar which is, I would say, not separated. They are all four are all converging in a single scopes, but in general are divided in such structure. Now, the most important one, which are we looking today, is the blue one, which is basically the development pillar. And if you can move on, please, George, next page. Thank you. Now, the development pillar is also very relevant for what concerns peace building. Some people think UN peacekeeping, so people in uniform with the blue helmet, going somewhere in a country which is in a problematic situation with the violence and war and so on. Now, as you know, peace enforcing is not used anymore. It was at the beginning in the 90s, then Bosnia experience has basically deleted that operation, but remains, of course, peacekeeping and peace building. Now, for what concerns development, the basic of peace building is development. And in my experience, I always connect security and development, peace and development, they go hand by hand. We cannot distinguish two different ways, two different approaches in this. In my personal opinion, is more everything connected. And development is the base of having peace. So in this slide, I try to present you how the process takes place. It takes, of course, many years. It's not something that can be done overnight. And here I also highlighted the main actors from the UN perspective, which are involved. Now, the DPPA is the new version of the Department of Political Affairs, which has included now the mentioning of peace building. That's why it is written orange, and also, of course, the UNNDS, the development system, which is the one implementing development with the different agencies that we're going to see later. Next slide, next page, please, George. So now the development pillar is also more than a pillar, is actually a base, as presented before, and is very relevant in the UN. This is just a summary. Of course, statistic data can change a bit over the years. And this is in summary what are inside the pillar of UN development. Now, this is not divided in agency, of course. We will see that better later. But overall, these are the four activities which UN development does with a substantial budget, which again is provided both by the countries, I mean the member states basically, and some other sources which are more external. We see also this later, how this has been shifting over the years and why the problems of the UN are also moving in that direction about finances and budget. Next slide, please. So now I would like, this was a kind of warming up about the UN in its structures. Now let's focus on the development pillar and also from an historical perspective. At the core, I'm a social historian, a sociologist, and an historian, a passionate historian. So my approach always has to do with looking at in the past what has been done and what are the challenges which the UN has faced since 1945, if not even before with the League of Nations, but that is maybe a different story, in particular for what concerns development. So what are the let's say the main targets which I've been studying to write the chapter you received and also this presentation? I've been approaching the issue from an historical perspective, and actually the situation that we are facing today, we will see the current situation better later, but has been always, so to say, a tradition, if I can use that word, in the UN. I mean, the reforms has always been needed. And the problems that UN has in this structure and implementation of its activity is nothing new. And in this sense, I would like to particularly pick up the base of the UN reform studies, which was in the 1969, the Jackson report. So there's been other reports, and we will see them, but the Jackson report is still, I think, today relevant, because some of the problems that the Jackson report highlighted, particularly for UNDP, which was the main target, so to say, but in general also about development system, some of these problems are not being, still today, have not been solved. And this is about 50 years ago, 53 years ago by now. So next slide, please. Some of the slides are self-explanatory, and I think to an audience like you might be even redundant to, you can understand it quite immediately. If you have been involved in UN activities or even in the field with NGOs and so on, which deal also with UN as a partner or a sponsor, the problems are quite well known. So I guess I'm probably repeating something that you already have experienced on your own. So problems of incoherence between agency, organization, structure, redundancy. Now we will see also about the relevance and effectiveness, because statistical data in the last studies, at least my data here are not really updated as today, but we can identify some trends. which make in the time the UN probably less relevant than it was before, at least in the last years, let's say. Next slide, please. If I'm going a bit too fast, maybe let me know, because there are many slides, and maybe we will need to jump on some, but let's see. So this is the Jackson report, which I take it as a milestone. 1969 was already more than 15 years that the UN existed. So it might be that it was already too late, because some even the first Secretary General at the times already recognized that there were some problems with the UN system, even in the 50s. But nevertheless, the first real study, which involved 100 well, there is a slide later on this, which involved many actors, was done by Robert Jackson, which was a former officer of the Navy during the Second World War, and I think Australian, by the way. And but he served in the British Navy, so in the at that time, as you know, was a single army. Now, Sir Robert Jackson was very much pragmatical, I would say, in his also in his language and in his findings. So the report was asked for obvious reason, because of they wanted to have some information to be given to the General Assembly, and also to show some attempts of reforming already in the 60s the UN. As you might know, before that report, there has been the famous merger, which also later created the UNDP, and that was probably the best time in this step to also be able to change something in the process. So, of course, as everything in the UN, this has to be decided by our governing council. So they appointed Jackson, and of course, he did a quite good job, very good job, by the way, because it has an impact. Now, let's see next slide what actually was this commission, the Jackson Commission. It involved, as is written, self-explanatory here, it involved 100 countries, 20 agencies, a team of 6 people where Jackson was the leader. And it took 1 year work to come out with the results. And now, what is funny, let's say, in this story about Jackson is that when you read the report, or also the records of these meetings, he was very pragmatic, but also a bit skeptical. He called, really, these are his words. It's not my paraphrasing or whatever, but the UN for him was a kind of machine with a kind of prehistoric monster. So, you can see on your own how the language was undiplomatic for that level of work. Also, his skepticism that few ministers will have time to read all these reports, and so on. So now let's speak about concretely what he in summary found out. Next slide, please. George?
Yes, I'm trying to move it. Yeah, there we go.
That is in one single picture. He called the major finding, that Like you can see the UN as a black hole and a prehistoric monster. Now, in terms of real problems and possible solution, next slide, please. Thank you. So here there were in the report some suggestion how to improve on the field level and also at the UNDP level the effectiveness of technical assistance. So there are different points, which are actually 3 slides on that. Most of them are says. I only will focus on some of them because the other are quite easy to understand. The operational aspect of UNDP. So, and it's still today, this is still a debate about how UNDP is effective in the field, if it's not too much bureaucratic, and if it's really an operation instead of a secretariat and so on. So that's why I'm saying some of the findings of Sir Robert Jackson are still relevant today. Now, for what concerns the country program and non-country program, this has been addressed. And in fact, UNDP has also, but in this way, in the same way as it also increased its bureaucracy by establishing regional offices, like, for example, the one in Bratislava, which is the European office, and actually also approaching programming in a regional way. And in my experience, it was the watershed management in Central Asia, which, as you know, water is a resource which is shared between countries, also in Africa, Sudan, Egypt, Ethiopia, and so on. In Central Asia, also the rivers which are crossing from Kyrgyzstan going to Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan. So basically, what I want to say is that a regional approach was determined at the time in the 60s and has been also implemented by UNDP in this sense, instead of focusing on individual countries, because problems are shared, like water is not, if you don't approach that in a regional way, like you had recently in the conflict between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan in south, in Osh, so you might not be able to solve those issues, in particular when it concerns resources. So not going longer with that. Next page, please. Now, this again is, I just pick up some of them, because if you read the report, you see in the pages which have been written here, these points. Now, one of the points which has never properly implemented is the fact that the head of the organization is accountable for all funds entrusted. This, in my opinion, is still something that probably Jackson went a bit too far in that. UNDP is slow. It's still today. So let's move on the next slide, because there are more findings in that sense. Now, the unanswered, yes, number 3. The unanswered questions about the capacity of UNDP. Now, development is not one single agency. At the time, the situation was much more, let's say, simple, if I can use that word. Now, there has been also a proliferation of agencies in the meantime. UNDP is not, I mean, it's the biggest one, is the leader, so to say, but it's not the only one that does development. That is also the reason why a delivering as one reform has been later than this, in 2000 and so on, by Kofi Annan at the time, has been programmed and is currently going on, because the agencies are in the pillar of the development pillar all do part of this development, not only UNDP. Sustainability issues. This is still a question today in many projects, as you know. Once the funding ends, the project ends. So question of sustainability was in the 60s, is still today a relevant problem in doing that pyramid, which I showed you before, from development to peace building, in particular in difficult society, in difficult countries. So sustainability, how long, for how long, with what resources, this is still today an open problem. So next slide, please. As I forgot to mention, this what we have seen is also some points written by a permanent representative from Holland in the OECD headquarters in Paris. So was not just the relevance of the Jackson report. Now, for what concerns the outcomes of the Jackson report, this was adopted, so the report was welcomed, apart of the fact that many criticized the language, which was undiplomatic and too aggressive. UNDP has taken the ball and has improved in certain areas, not in everything, that the conclusion of the Jackson report require. So this slide is also summarizing what I've been working on these conclusions. So we can move on with more, let's say, actual problem, and also a bit about the history of the reforms itself, because I say the Jackson report was not the only one. There have been successive attempts. Now, Lord Boyd, which was a food and agriculture organization, so he said that actually he was a bit skeptical as well about this, how the country, the member states, will actually be able to support this Jackson report. So next slide, please. Yes, this is more important, is about what happened next. And here, the study I sent you is highlighting all of these steps. Today, I will basically jump from 1969 to 2006, not going too long, because I think for the public, for the audience, is more important to discuss about current situation and how to tackle the problems of the UN. But in any case, you can see here the milestones of UN reforms reports, the Gardner report and the Carlson-Ramphal report. And lastly, and this is more important by now, the delivering as one, which I will spend some words on this because I've been involved in that process when I was in Kyrgyzstan. As a head of agency, I was involved in the UNCT, and I could see the United Nations country team, and I could see how the idea of delivering as one was implemented on the country level among the agency. In my perspective, it was a very positive way of working, and it was very effective in a certain way for project orientation and project programming. And that's why it's probably the most relevant issue at the moment, still actual, the delivering as one reform. Next slide, please. So why is necessary? First of all, because these are more current issues, and that's why I'm jumping more to actual situation. The UN face an organizational complexity, which from the Jackson report has not been much improved. Agency have been added to agency, and their secretariat have been added to secretariats. The offices have been expanded. UN has been extra demanded in different countries, in developing countries. So this adds more problems than solution to reform the UN today than in the 60s. And this slide is also about the acronym. They are quite known, I mean, quite used. So DPKO, DPA, and so on are the structure below the Secretary General, the Security Council, and also on the side you have the agencies, the most relevant one in the development and in humanitarian affairs, and all the rest. We will also see that later. Not to forget how the funding system works. From top to down, and the reporting system from bottom to up. So civil society, stakeholders are also involved in this system. That's why it's also necessary to reform, not just for the bureaucracy itself, but also to be more effective with the bottom part of this slide. Next, I see that time is running, so next slide, please. As I said, I jumped directly to the delivering as one because is a current reform still going on since 2006. So it's about 15, 16 years now that this is implemented. Personally, I said I could see in one of the countries how this was done, and this is next slide, please. Next page, please. Yes. So this is the ideal, let's say the ideal situation in one country, how the UN should work, the structure. So before that, the UNDP as a main agency for development was actually having the double cap, the double role of being both resident coordinator, which is the acronym RC, and being at the same time the RR, which is the resident representative. So this issue was a bit conflicting with the other agencies, and here comes a bit of my personal view, because UNDP tended a bit to dominate the agenda in project programming, in financing, and so on and so forth. So they delivering as one, as foreseen that the resident coordinator should be directly linked to the secretariat, and UNDP and the resident rep, like other agencies, here is an example, could be UNESCO, could be WHO, AG1, AG2. So the organization, the agencies, sorry, which are present on the field in one specific country, they are part of the same team and they are supposed to be equal. Now, this is obviously in the practice not really possible because, as you know, some agencies are more powerful than others, not to mention UNICEF among them. So how really this is going then to work in a country style base, it depends very much by the capacity of the RC, so the resident coordinator, which now, according to the delivery as one, should be an independent figure, so not linked with any of the agencies, but linked directly to the secretary. So in some countries, this is implemented, in some others, it's still on the way. hopefully, when this will run smoothly, maybe we have a much more effective of development aid and development projects in one specific country. So having said that, let's move on with other problems, other issues at stake. The organizational incoherence. So the delivering as one also has to face this cumbersome situation, not only between agencies, but also between the UN and its agencies. Funding mechanism in particular is always torn issues. Who gets what, in which way, so many agencies, so many countries, so many headquarters. So that is what makes, but it is only one challenge among possible three challenges. So the organizational structure, the difficult structure of the UN is only one of them. George, next page, please. Thank you for your, yes. So now let's see also about statistic, because so far I've been speaking more about approaches and reports, and there's solution proposed by reports or reforms like the DAO. But we also have to understand how the situation is evolving, how the system itself is facing some challenges, external and internal. Now, here you have these two cakes, show you a bit how, for example, from 2000 to 2015, the UN has basically reduced of a half the multilateral assistance shares, something that we should also consider, how the UN is struggling for funds, because you can reform the system, but you also need money for doing that. And when money gets less, then you might need to cut some personnel, or you might need to cut some agencies, right? As you know, some agencies are so-so, maybe they still continue, they still will be deleted, or let's say disappear. So this in a nutshell shows you the changing environment in which also the UN has to move in order to be pragmatic and field-oriented, right? So issues of financing are also at stake. Next slide, please. So here you can also see from the 90s how the UN core funds, which are those who are running. So here is actually in the case of the UNDP, of course, as our main agencies in development. These trends tells you also how the UN should reform, in which way. I mean, what is the problem that the UN should also address in terms of technical assistance? Is the UN still relevant like it was in the 90s, UNDP? Apparently not, at least not for what concerns the core funding on technical assistance. So most of the money now, most of the funds are coming from other sources. We will see that a bit later. But this is also a situation that UN needs to consider, right? Perhaps reducing personnel or reducing intervention, we'll see. Next slide, please. A bit more about statistics on how relevant is the organization. Now, I spoke about UNDP until here. Probably I've been focusing a bit too much on it, but as I said, there are many agencies which are involved in development. It's not one single one. and this is coordinated, supposed to be coordinated. Now here, these are statistics from a bit old, from 2014, right? So there is a perception about who is more relevant than other. Now, the pandemic of COVID-19 has put very much in light the WHO. It's a situation that happened. It was not foreseen, of course, in 2014 when this survey was done. But in general, appears that in even developed countries, or these three, this matrix here, WHO is the more. Then it came UNICEF for what concerns developed countries. So it's also a matter of perception, I would say. In my personal experience, it's true that when you are in the field, the UN is relevant only for what you see in a specific place, in a specific country. For some countries, some agencies are more relevant than others for might be a situation that is specific for that country, or for some project that the UN has been carried on, which have been more visible than other agencies. So this situation changed country by country, I would say. UNESCO, for example, I was working at the UNESCO headquarters in Paris at the time, at the World Heritage Center. For me, UNESCO was a very relevant organization, also because I was in the headquarters, I was involved in the activity worldwide, and particularly for Africa. But anyway, I had an inside view of that organization. And for me, but when I went, for example, in Latin America, or in particular in Kyrgyzstan, in Central Asia, UNESCO didn't even have an office in Kyrgyzstan. They had it in Kazakhstan. So the perspective I had, personally, this is only my personal remark, of course, was different from when I was in the headquarters, of course. So this can change, as I said, this can change also over the years and country by country. So next slide, please. We need to, I think we are already almost on time. For what concerns specific development topics, issues, also you can see here the share of the development system organization can change according to the countries where these data are coming from. For some is more relevant health, of course, that's why also the WHO is on top of it. Human rights, education, this is particularly for what concerns UNESCO. So these slides are self-explanatory about how the perception can change place by region or country by country about this topic. So let's move quickly on the last slides. So now let's speak about the future. This is my preferred area topic, because as a historian, I've been looking at the history of the UN reforms, but for me, history is something that is very much relevant and very much important. As much as you can, on the basis of history, determine what should be or what are the action needed at the moment for what is coming up. So history is useful in my perspective for what concerns the future. The past, we can't change it anymore. So at least we can study it, we can research, archives and so on, but the future is most relevant. And this is also the question, sorry, this is also the question for the UN. In the current challenging world and about particularly multilateralism, we can put in this pot of discussion also the UN. Last week I had a problem about this, how the UN the UN Security Council should be reformed. There are many options. we are not going to talk about this now because it's about development, but in a certain way, multilateralism affects also development sector, the UNDS. What are actually the current challenges for reforming the UNDS in a context of multilateralism, which seems to be shared worldwide as a necessity at the moment? And this will also bring us to the conclusion of this presentation. Next slide, please. Now, here a very academic definition of multilateralism. Let's take this as a goal. Let's hope that multilateralism can also be a driver for UNDS reforms. The question is, how do you implement this concept of a multilateral UNDS in the current situation, which is particularly difficult at the moment, at least in the last 2 years. You know what's going on, in particular in Europe and worldwide. There are kind of shift in paradigms, which involved all regions in the world, including Africa, the Middle East, and processes which involved the main power like the United States, China, Russia. So how do we face this situation, and how could we reform the UN in such context? Now, in the next slide is a kind of graduation. Thank you, that one. Yes, George, this one. So countries are moving, economies are rising. In about 10 years ago, before doing my PhD, my initial idea for the PhD dissertation was based on Wallerstein theory, and the title of my initial dissertation was Shifting Cause and Periphery. This was about 10 years ago, before the current situation. So my initial topic for the PhD was about the situation when, in particular, Europe is facing, which is declining, and other powers are rising, including the BRICS. So there is, in terms of Wallerstein approach to world system, a shift in the global system where actually China is rising and is shifting the core for what was the traditional Europe to more Asian areas as a core. And this involves also Africa, Latin America, and the remaining countries in Europe and in North America. So this situation has been progressed, I would say, in the last years. Countries and regimes are changing. The role of the social media and so on. So here I'm putting a bit of plus and minuses for what concerns the last 20 years, so to say. But inequalities anyway are not reduced, and this could be even a further problem. Now, next slide, please, and we are going to conclude in 1 hour. The other challenges that the UN should face for its reform is the roles of civil society. Now, in the initial slide at the beginning, I show you that the civil society is not the one that has more X than the member states, but a reform of the UN should shift those X on the third pillar, right? To give more voice to the abasement of the UN, for what the UN actually is supposed to work for, by the way. So the UN SDGs are intended in that sense. They involve many actors, including from the corporate sector, NGOs. So everybody is involved, country-based, on this program. So to finish with it, another point is the role of the private sector, as I said, corporate. Next slide, please. Sorry, George. Right. So the corporate sector now with the global compact has been involved very much recently in achieving the UN SDGs. This shift can be also seen as a trend within the UN itself to externalize some activities and project which the UN has been working on for many, many years. I won't say that is a privatization of the UN, that might be too much, but in a certain way, the UN is reducing its core, let's say, it's not the core, but the surrounding.
No, quédate tranquila, yo el cable le dejé
Sí, muy bien. And so it's actually reducing a bit to the core function and cutting maybe some parts of the tree to other actors, private or NGOs, right? So let's move on, please, and let's finish with that. This is an ideal situation, right, to end the silos that traditionally the UN has been targeted for, these different activities. And if you see a bit this slide here, remembers a bit the issue of the circularity of the UNDGs. As you know, the 17 UNDGs are connected. They are not single pillar, they are not single squares as the icon of each UN SDGs represent. So this kind of approach, global approach, should also be one target of UN reforms, right? So here you have these three sectors which are interlinked, and at the core of all should remain the human development, particularly for the UNDS. Now, another possible reform, next slide, please. This is more difficult to achieve. As I said, most of this information comes also from Geneva, from the Graduate Institute. It's not all my own slides. So I've been putting a bit of everything together for this presentation. So I don't take credit for this. It's credit from other people, other professors, and also my institute in Geneva. So this structure could be perhaps a new structure of the UN. As you can see, the Security Council will only be on that side with humanitarian and peace building, while the UN Security Council today has very much power for a lot of decisions, which of course are political, by the way. So this let's say the side of the UN Council, the Security Council, is another debate which we are not going to talk tonight. Perhaps how to reform the Security Council, how to enlarge it. Veto should be there or not? Shall the more countries have veto, or we should actually take out the veto to everyone? Maybe doing like the UN, a system of majority voting. We'll see. Now, for what concerns the other pillar, the relevant for us for tonight, the creation of Economic Security Council. That of course could be more pragmatical on issues which are very relevant to the UN. How the agencies, including the World Bank, are going to approve that structure, it's open to discussion. So this is a very ideal situation. I say the member states still have relevant decision. So it's like in the Security Council, if the member states do not agree, the UN doesn't move. So we should always think that UN is actually member states, and there is where the decision comes from. If they agree, yes. If they don't agree, nothing moves. So let's conclude, George, and so we are on time. This slide is just the conclusion of my study. So these are three paragraphs on the conclusions, which are self-explanatory, in my view, how the situation is changing. And one of the conclusions of my study is actually connected to the climate of the international environment. So the paradigms are changing as they changed in the past, including in the 90s, when the end of the supposed end of the Cold War happened. They were changing with the decolonization process in the 60s, the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s. The situation that developed countries also faced internally, like terrorism, crisis, and so on, influenced also the decision-making in the UN. So to bring this in a nutshell, I would say that at this point, a reform is needed. And if we follow the tradition, is also needed because things are changing, paradigms are changing worldwide. And in fact, the UN tried always to reform when these external factors were present. And on this note, I will move to the last slides, please. This is more a question to the audience. About the Jackson Report again, as a milestone, as a first attempt to reform, how is still relevant today? This might be, for me, an interesting point to get your opinions. And with the last slide, I conclude, and I thank you for the attention on this presentation, and I, of course, open for discussion and any question you might have on everything, or in particular on this UNDS process. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Achim, for this wonderful presentation. It was on the long pedigree of United Nations development system reforms, continuity and change. And so now we welcome the audience for questions and comments. A lot of useful information, I must say, that was. Yes, please, Eliseo.
Yes.
Eliseo, please, and then Hafiz.
Thank you very much, Dr. George, for this opportunity. And also thank you for the invitation for this wonderful platform. I would like to thank Achim, Alan de Merlo for the wonderful presentation, but also for this very important content that we discussed today. First of all, before posing my question, I would like to try to release my stress a little bit. I've been all these days since last presentation questioning myself if I had not been inconvenient in my last intervention when I talked about the UN in sometimes being irrelevant for the humankind or for the human race that it has proposed to serve so well in its foundation in the starting moment of the UN. And I've been all these days questioning myself if I had expressed myself well in saying that the UN is being irrelevant for the humankind. And from the lessons I took today, I am thinking now, I'm a little bit relieved, thinking that maybe we were not wrong, we were correct, because indeed the UN, it knows itself that it's being irrelevant. So in some way, I would say. So my first question is on the problems that the UN has. With so many advancements in technology, in artificial intelligence, I would like to know from Achim, what is really the problem of UN to reform? If it knows its aim, it knows its purpose, and those aims and that purpose is not being corresponded today. We are living in a time that is very dangerous to all of us, of wars, and now with the threats of almost entering into atomic use of, or the use of atomic arms. So I think this is very dangerous to humankind. And the UN is there with its roles. What is happening with it? Why can't it reform? I will make, maybe I'm repeating the same question that President Mugabe made in his intervention in the 71st or 72nd intervention. Reform the UN Security Council. And why can't it reform if it's not relevant? This is my first question. The second, maybe it is a contribution that I would give. I'm looking at the countries which most of the times ahead of other countries, like the big G8, G16, or the big 4, or the big 5 in Europe, which last week my colleague Ngapemba called them the big potatoes. Last week we were talking about the big potatoes. And is it that the problem of the UN resides in that the big potatoes contribute more in the organizations, in the small organizations, and that's why they can abuse, because they can abuse power, they can abuse privileges because they give more. So if it is because of giving more, is it possible to include in the reform of the UN that may be in the contributions, all countries take the same measures, all countries take the same responsibilities, share responsibilities, because I am thinking that sometimes we should also take, like, for example, Africa as an equal member. I mean not Africa as a continent, but African countries as responsible also for some steps, for some kind of power inside the UN, because Africa is taken most of the times as the most suffering, the weakest boy, and the unfortunate. That's why it cannot give much. And as a consequence, it doesn't have those powers, it doesn't have more privileges. So is it possible in your suggestion of reforms in the UN also include some kind of responsibility shared equally among the big potatoes and African countries? Thank you very much.
Right. George, shall I answer?
Yes, please. You may respond. Yes.
Yes. So the question of Hafiz about the Security Council, this is also a matter of reforms. But of course, at the moment, everything is, now I speak in my personal capacity. Maybe I could be wrong, but as you know, the P5 are set since the end of the Second World War. And they have a right of veto in everything which concerns UN intervention. So last week we had the discussion with some professors in Tokyo that the UN was unable to intervene in Yemen. It was unable to stop the Syrian conflict. I remember personally Stephen de Mistura when he was talking in Geneva a few years ago. And as you know, he resigned from that post as a special envoy to solve the Syrian conflict. The matter now in Ukraine, where the UN is basically only involved in the issue of the Green Deal with Russia, Turkey, and the Ukrainian government. So this can be something positive, but on the other hand, as you have remarked, Hafiz, it's useless. But it's also useless because, or irrelevant, better irrelevant, because the settings which are in the UN Security Council are settings which are not anymore actual, I would say. So the reform that is needed is a reform that unfortunately needs the approval of this P5. If the P5 do not approve the reform will not move forward. Now, in the current situation of conflict, where you have on one side, you have China and Russia, all permanent members of the Security Council. And on the other side, you have the Europeans, you can put France or United Kingdom and the United States as also an hegemonic power. Nothing much can be done. What I just will say, and here I conclude to answer to this question, is again, we can be idealistic as we want, and we will continue to be idealistic and wanting that the UN could reform in a more updating way with the current situation of the world. That we need probably a major shift in the world system. And the current situation might decide this shift in the world system, because as far as we go, these 5 member states will block each other, as it happened during the Cold War. So if we don't get out from this lock, it's not the UN itself which is irrelevant, it's also that the member states, and in particular the most important member states, those who actually contribute at most to the UN budget, make it themselves the UN irrelevant. So I've been hearing people saying the UN did not this, the UN did not that, the UN could not that. Let's spend our word in favors to the UN. What is the UN? The UN, as I saw you, as I tried here to explain on the first slide, the UN are the member states. Is it true that in the General Assembly, every member state has one single vote? That's true. You have seen that with the voting, the recent voting of the General Assembly about the resolution on Ukraine and the invasion of Ukraine. But this is the General Assembly. Things are much more decided beyond that level. So who decides what to propose to the General Assembly? That is the point. And how the UN moves, it always decided between certain power. And that is the obstacle itself of the UN. But this has been set from the very beginning in a situation in 1945, which is different than today. So God knows what still will come. And we can only be, positive and idealistic, but it's a very big issue. The next years, perhaps will determine in which way we move, because as in the chapter that I sent, the conclusion says this, that the UN reform, it goes in parallel traditionally with what the system, the world system, was able to achieve on a determined time. It's not an organization which is on another planet, it's on the earth. and therefore is influenced by what is happening worldwide, between powers, between nations, between member states. Now, for the second question about the issue of the G7, Africa, and an equal share of responsibility. Now, for the African continent itself, my memory is when I was in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in Ivory Coast, in working on Africa, on the World Heritage Center in Paris. Sometime I was saying to the people and thinking about, please help yourself. So in the sense that do not think always that the UN has a magic stick, or even the G7, the most powerful countries, the European as former colonizer, they have a magic stick to solve and take responsibility on the issues happening in Africa. Please help yourself. The African Union has been steadily increasing, for example, for what concerns peacekeeping, steadily increasing its role, and that is a positive trend. Where the UN cannot be successful, cannot be relevant, please help yourself. Regional organizations are very much more effective than issues or solutions decided in New York. So in a certain way, the responsibility can be shared, of course, but also should also be taken from the ground, right? A certain concept of subsidiarity needs to be applied in that sense. So to African friends, I will say, yes, equal decision, but do not always expect solution from one side to the other. You know Africa better than anyone. And you know your people, you know your society, your culture, your different. Africa is a huge continent with, huge resources. From South Africa to Nigeria to North Africa, there are so many differences, so many people, so many languages. As much as you can solve among you these problems, it's also a positive step for us. So do not expect the UN always to be able to solve that on the field.
Thank you very much, Achim. And Afiz, please. The first question was from Eliseo, but now Afiz, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation. And I'm very, very much grateful for the presentation. And it shows that there's no any organizations or country in the world without their own problem or challenges that they face. Because with the organization and structure of UN, one could be wondering how this sort of problem comes up. But that's apart. But my question is that what can UN do to prevent war and to stop the ongoing war in various countries like the Russian and Ukraine? What are their measures that they are taking to stop the war? The one going on in Sudan as well. What is their measure that they should take? I think Achim has already answered the one of the Africa. He said the African Union to also rise up to take control where UN fails to fix. So this number one question. Because I noticed that UN, among the organizations in the world, maybe what are the organizations, UNICEF, UN was created after the war, World Second, to stop and prevent war. If they cannot be more active in other aspects of human endeavor, like economical aspects or social aspects, at least in that war aspect, they should be more proactive to stop the war or to prevent any occurrence of the war. And if they can do so, we will avoid or we will not be able to encounter or experience Third World War. So that's my number one question. Then number two is on the finance. The finance that we are talking about, if any country is involved or as a member of UN, there should be a particular amount of money that they are generating from each of these countries, perhaps maybe every month, maybe yearly. There should be a particular fix that they are going to be paying, whether developing or underdeveloping, because the essence of UN is for development. If I can hear you said there are 4 pillars. Number 1 is peacekeeping. Number 2, human rights. Number 3, humanitarian service. Then number 4, which is development that we just discussed with us here. So there should be a particular fixed amount. It will not be as if this G country, this big country is contributing or not. Every country is involved should be able to be contributing so particular amount, irrespective of the size of the country. So that's my submission and my contribution. Thank you. And my question as well.
George, shall I move on?
Yes,
George?
please. Yes, we have 1 minute left, and please, you can also summarize also your presentation now.
Unfortunately, I couldn't get everything. There is some break in the connection, but I got the main points of Hafiz's second question for what concerns the budget, and I understood something about how we can solve the current conflict. Now, the UN, basically, what they can do is try to prevent a conflict to happen. Peace enforcing is not anymore the case. It happened, for example, as I said, in Bosnia, when Kofi Annan was the director of UNDPKO. We know what happened, that peacekeepers have been killed. There has been a situation when basically the UN cannot intervene in a conflict now with the new regulation after the Brahimi report. We cannot intervene in a country that is in conflict. So it's basically forget about UN intervention in Ukraine, UN intervention in Sudan at the moment. This cannot be achieved by the UN. The UN can help for a peace process, for example, like it happened in Colombia, right, between the government and the FARC. But to intervene and stop a conflict, that is actually not possible. Also because the UN Security Council will not agree on that. And on this way, I turn back to the member states. The UN can stop a conflict as far as member states agree that the UN can. So it's a cycle. So I hope this question is answered. For what concerns the budget, the rules are that the UN budget is determined on the contribution to the UN budget are determined on the basis of the national GDP. So poor countries, developing countries are not able to contribute, even if they are big in terms of extension, in terms of population, they are not able to contribute in the same way as developed countries contribute to the UN. In this way, we turn again the issue to the fact that the most developing countries are also those who contribute at most to the UN system, and also at the end are those who actually determine at most the UN agenda. And this is a vicious cycle where actually we should, as Hafiz has remarked, we should get off of it. So we need a better situation where the budget is determined in other way. How this will be done, how will this be approved? For example, take China. China is a country which is supposed still a developing country for UN standards. But in reality, is one of the most rich, I mean, in terms of GDP, is increasing the last 20 years. For example, China still plays the role of saying, oh, we are a developing country, we are still developing. But wait a moment, China, you are quite getting rich at the moment. So I put this in a very blatant and very simple way. But as I said, these kind of reforms, including in the budgeting system, in the contribution system, have to be updated to the current circumstances or the evolving circumstances. And that is a good point of Hafiz. If we are we able to do that, again, are the member states who decide about this. If they don't want to change the system, it will not change.
Thank you very much indeed, Achim. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation, for the wonderful, questions and comments. I would like to thank everyone for your participation, and especially to invite you again, because next week we'll be talking about a new paradigm. So I think the UN will again be in our discussion, because we cannot talk about a new paradigm without actually including the UN. And we'll be with Zep Larouche, Helga Zep Larouche. And so I welcome you all to please continue attending Global Peace Studies for Sustainable Development in Africa. Thank you very much indeed also to our colleagues in Argentina for the wonderful job on the technology. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, George. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Afid. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.